So the last time we met, I told you about The Necromancer's Tale, Citizen Sleeper 2, and Cyber Knight's Flashpoint, and that video was called RPGs That Did It For Me in 2025 Part 1. Link in the description. And now I am here to deliver Part 2 of that video, so without further ado, here are the games. The Monster Breeder. The spirit of indie games is alive and kicking in this one. If Keep Driving, which is coming up on this list, is the most original RPG that I have ever played, then The Monster Breeder is probably the second one. And I'm not saying this out of recency bias. It's also one of the most amazing games of the year. It would have been in my top 10 of 2025 if it hadn't been for a plethora of tiny little problems that aren't too big all by themselves, but when put together, they hurt the experience quite a bit in my opinion. And we're going to talk about those things later. In this game, you play as some sort of autist who lives in the middle of nowhere in a place that's little more than a ruin. Representation in video games? Nailed it. And what do you do for a living? I breed monsters and pit them against other monsters at the local gladiator arena, thank you very much. They have all sorts of fights there, some of them entail two parties of monsters beating the shit out of each other, some are regular arena fights between two groups of human combatants, and yet some others are mixed. At the beginning of the game, you choose the kingdom where you're going to live. This decision defines the resources, the types of missions that are available to you, and the types of recruits that you're likely to find more easily. And then you create your dude, and yes, you can only be a dude in this game, and choose his class. Now, this is a very extremely important choice, because you have combatant and non-combatant classes. You can be a warrior, an archer, a sorcerer, an alchemist, or a blacksmith. The first three classes can participate in combat, while the other two can't. Now, why is this important? Well, because if you die in this game, it's game over. And there's no way to customize this in the options. And I don't know about you, but I like living. So you can be in it for the glory, or you can be the CEO of your own monster breeding SME. But if you're planning on being a monster breeding entrepreneur, you don't want to roll a warrior, an archer, or a sorcerer, because these classes are completely useless outside the arena, and having a free alchemist or a blacksmith can make a big difference in the game. Combat classes have attributes, much as they do in every RPG, that determine their strengths and weaknesses, and each of them has its own array of talent trees. It's interesting that over the course of the game, they can learn skills that aren't in their talent tree through story events. For example, if you run into this guy and defeat him in battle, as a way to bargain for his life, he can teach you the Invoke Wrath spell, which makes the target monster insanely more powerful. Alchemists and blacksmiths, on the other hand, have skills, and you can min-max them to an extent at the beginning of the game, and then get better in the art as you progress through the game. And you can also hire combatants to do your dirty work for you. Your companions, both human and monstrous, level up over the course of the game by winning encounters, and every time they do, you get to allocate some point to a skill in their skill tree. Each monster type has its own skill tree also, by the way. You can also, of course, equip them with weapons, armor, and consumables of all sorts. Humans, that is, not monsters, of course. But there's also a world map, and there are plenty of things for you to do. Mini dungeons, story events, ambushes, and even expeditions. And you can find all sorts of crazy stuff in them, from rare eggs that you can hatch and then use to breed them into unique monsters, interesting loot, slave workers, people willing to teach skills. It's crazy, actually. And it's a good way to take your monster pets for a walk and have them level outside the arena, which is usually less hazardous to their health. At the arena, you can go full manager mode if you wish and choose the auto battle option, which is interesting for difficult fights with good prizes in which victory is hard to obtain and for which you plan to use disposable monsters anyway. Otherwise, they do seem to yield the worst possible outcome compared to what it would be if you handled the fight yourself. Also, why would you skip the most fun part of the game? If you use sensible tactics and make good decisions during the battle, you may even defeat opponents that are much higher level than you, and that feels super awesome. Which takes us to the most important questions that you guys probably have. What about the combat? Is it good? Well, don't let the ugly graphics and simple layout of the arena fool you. Combat is good in this game. The layout is isometric and combat is turn-based. Enemy AI is really good and tactics are important. prioritizing your targets, kiting enemies, funneling your opponents into choke points. These are all things that you'll need to do regularly to come out on top. And the same is true of dungeons. Human and monster companions can die in this game, so you have to see your monsters and human companions like tactical assets and plan your long-term game a little bit like you did in the original Darkest Dungeon. There are important decisions to be made during the game and right before a fight, like what gear to buy, what kind of monsters to breed, and what kind of human and monster combatant to send into a fight. Because yes, some classes and some types of monsters are more or less useful depending on the situation. And some types of battle require certain type of combatants, gear, or party composition. And you want to have every angle covered. The most important decisions, however, are the ones you make during the combat encounter itself, so the game is as tactical as it is strategic. Now, improving your base and your breeding grounds and managing risk appropriately is how you win this game, a little bit like it is in the original Darkest Dungeon. You have to keep your monsters in optimal conditions, you want to make the most out of your new monsters, you want to make the strongest potion and the most efficient gear, etc. So while combat is very important and it is the most fun part of the game, the long-term game is very important as well, because this game is brutally punishing, I tell you. Now, I think the gameplay cycle in the Monster Breeder is utterly fantastic. I love how all of the mechanics come together into a thoroughly enjoyable, cohesive whole, the likes of which I had never seen, like, ever. The arena encounters are fun, the quests are fun, the long-term monster breeding and stronghold management is fun. It is a fun game. But there are a few things that I find incredibly frustrating about this title. First, the user experience outside of combat is atrocious. Not that it's excellent in combat, but it's manageable. Buying and selling things, managing your stronghold or your companions, these are very important things in the Monster Breeder. But the UX of these things is the antithesis of the principles of desirability and usability that you're supposed to adhere to when designing your game's user experience. Clarity and simplicity? Consistency and familiarity? Yeah, fuck that shit. Also, the Corpseman may not be the best card battler out there, but if the breeding system in the Monster Breeder had the UX of the system in that game, we'd be talking about a candidate for Game of the Year here. Alas, that is very far from being the case. There is this other thing that I don't like about the Monster Breeder. It's not too important to me, but it might be very important to some other people, and it's the fact that the game is absolutely ugly! Holy shit, is this game ugly. And it's not by design, I tell you. This is a one-man project, and you can tell by the graphics that that one man's strong suit isn't the visuals. The monsters look hideous, and not the way you'd want them to. Locations, items, and human characters look bad, and man, that UI, it makes me not want to engage with some of the game's mechanics. But despite these shortcomings, I still consider the Monster Breeder to be one of the most pleasant and original surprises of the year, and I'm surely going to be playing this game many more dozen hours in 2026. And I now wish to see other devs building upon this premise, because I think it's absolutely fantastic. Spellpowder Uprising. Spellpowder Uprising is a turn-based RPG that takes place in a setting that reminds me of Arcanum and Jules Verne. The game's aesthetics are reminiscent of point-and-click adventure games and RPGs from the mid to late 80s, and I think it looks quite charming. The conflict between magic and technology, or rather between magic users and technologists, is prevalent in Spellpowder Uprising, just as it is in Arcanum. But Spellpowder Uprising does something different with this premise. In Arcanum, the theme of magic versus technology serves as a backdrop to the story, and it adds to the world-building aspect of the game. But in Spellpowder Uprising, it is the very turnstone of the story. Magia, as they call it in the game, manifests in the world through crystals that radiate an energy that only a select few can harness and weave into magic. It was said that those capable of wielding magic were of noble origin and therefore had noble blood. It's interesting, however, that it's not clear whether these nobles were blessed with magic because they had noble blood, or if they were regular individuals who were randomly blessed by magic and they then used their powers to hoard wealth, education, and resources, and eventually became an elite because of this. Whatever the case may be, those who weren't blessed with magic didn't sit around on their asses. They developed technology to compete with magic users, jump-starting an industrial revolution in the process. But they were always considered commoners. But now noblemen and noblewomen are disappearing left, right, and center. How could this be? Who could be behind these disappearances, and more importantly, why? These are some of the questions that you'll need to find answers to in Spellpowder Uprising, and they will all get very satisfying answers. The world-building aspect of the game is also seamless and smart, and the story is straightforward, unpretentious, and it doesn't take itself too seriously, but it offers interesting stakes to keep you invested, even if the main character itself is a bit of a feather in the wind who keeps getting involved in stuff that is of no personal interest to him or her. To me, it's obvious that the writers knew their limitations and played to their strengths. These guys aren't precisely Chris Avalon, so don't expect sophisticated narration and dialogue consistent with the time period depicted or anything like that. I can't see people shaking their heads with the game's dialogue, but I found it fun and even endearing. The story came across as lighthearted and often even humorous, even if there are some pretty dark moments every now and then. Combat is the most important aspect of the gameplay mix in Spellpowder Uprising. Actually, there is not much else to do in this game. Combat is turn-based, and positioning your characters is a very important thing. Rolls are also important, but they don't go beyond the simple classic tanking, healing, and DPS functions. And for a game in which magic is so important thematically, the spells your magic users do don't go beyond direct damage, healing, and a couple of other things, which is a bit of a bummer. Despite its simplicity, gameplay is surprisingly varied, and it's because the game puts you in all sorts of situations. Sometimes you need to hold the line, sometimes you need to escape and survive, sometimes you need to navigate a system of tunnels that require you to plan your character's movements carefully, sometimes you have enemy spawn points, etc. Guarding is a little bit overpowered, especially early on in the game, especially in difficulties below veteran. And that's why I recommend that you go for a difficulty equal to or greater than veteran for your first run. I like that there is a long-term success component to the game, and it depends on how thorough and efficient you are in clearing the game's levels. You never get to explore any of the game's levels freely, so you have to make sure that you collect all the loot there is to be collected and do everything there is to be done before you kill the last enemy. And that can require some planning. You have companions in this game, and they are surprisingly quirky and fun. And unlike most other games in the RPG ballpark, the game's main mission revolves around what your companions need to do, which is an interesting change. You have control over all of them just as much as you do over your main character, which is also great. These companions have personal missions that take place in non-mandatory areas, but in order to get them to talk about their personal quests, you need to gain devotion with them. There are combat encounters to be fought, experience to be gained, and loot to be collected in these locations, so you want to visit all of them before the final stretch of the game. You might want to get that tea room unlocked as soon as possible, because drinking tea with your friends is how you get them to open up about their missions. Also, I think your level of devotion has an impact on the final scene of the game that takes place while the credits roll, but I am not entirely sure. There is itemization in Spellpowder Uprising, and it is an important part of your character's progression. Your characters level up, and they eventually reach a level where they can choose one of two possible archetypes depending on their initial class, and this happens several times over the course of the game. You have a flying zeppelin that works like your stronghold, and you can upgrade it in many different ways. So far so good, right? Well, yes. I enjoyed my time with Spellpowder Uprising. In fact, as an RPG that takes place in a Victorian setting in which magic and technology are at odds, I've enjoyed it more than the so-called Arcanum's spiritual successor, New Arcline, but there's still hope for this one because it's still in early access. So at the beginning of the game, you make a series of choices pertaining your character's background, as you do in Arcanum. In fact, you can choose what your character did at different stages of his or her life, which is great. But this only affects your character's initial stats. The world doesn't care about what you did or who you were. It also doesn't care that you're a dwarf or an elf or a human. There is no cultural or idiosyncratic difference between the races. So your choice of race is basically just cosmetic. There are a couple of dialogue lines that are specific to your origin as a commoner or a noble, but not much else. You don't have passages like the ones you have early on in Pillars of Eternity, where you and Kalisha have a brief conversation that is specific to your character's origin, or the many dialogue lines and passages that you have in Dragon Age Origins that are specific to your race. But more importantly, this is a game in which the capability to wield magic determines whether you are a noble or a commoner, and this choice has almost zero impact on the story, which is a bummer. Now, I think there are a couple of things that you should know about Spellpowder Uprising. Do consider that this is a linear game. There are secondary quests that you may or may not unlock depending on your companion's devotion level, but I wouldn't say this changes the fact that the game is linear. Also, know that your choices don't have an impact on the story, so I wouldn't say the game is big on player agency either. And, just in case it needs to be said, non-combat skill-based mechanics like stealth, lockpicking, and pickpocketing aren't a thing in Spellpowder Uprising. And, just so you know, this is not a list of things that I don't like about the game, just things that the game doesn't do by design, features and mechanics that just weren't part of the plan. Those of you who know me a little better are probably wondering why this game landed on this list when I have given so much shit to so many others for not having enough emergent gameplay, or for not giving me the opportunity to have an impact on the story with my actions and decisions, or for having clumsy dialogue that's not consistent with the game setting, or for not having stealth, lockpicking, or pickpocketing mechanics. Well, I think it's always a matter of expectations versus what you end up getting from the game. And yes, sometimes I do have a tendency to judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, but that's not what's happening here. Rogandir Studios clearly thought of an MVP. No, not that MVP, a minimum viable product. And then they thought of how to make it stand out in the crowd. They were keenly aware of their limitations and played to their strengths. And what we got was a short, fun, and concise RPG with endearing characters and a surprisingly solid story to keep you invested all the way through. One of you said on Discord, I can't shake the feeling that there is a deep, interesting, nuanced story that could have been built on this basic premise. The setting is intriguing, the social conflict is potentially poignant, there are so many things that I'd love to learn more about, like the bleaching or the clan wars, or why and how orcish society manages to slip slavery under the Empire's radar, etc. I liked so much that I wish it had been more of, well, everything. And I agree with this sentiment, but I understand that these guys aren't writers. Rogandir Studios probably only wanted the story in the game to be interesting enough to get you invested in the gameplay. But I take it as a big win that some people were so invested in the story that they ended up wanting to know more about everything. I take it as a sign that these guys are better at making stories than even they realize. Also, it's quite pleasant in 2025 to play a game that is completely free of the post-2016 disease that has been contaminating entertainment. Also, the bad guys in this story, how should I put it? Let's just say that people with their political ideas aren't usually portrayed as the bad guys these days, but as paladins of justice or as victims. And I find it very ballsy and refreshing that in 2025 someone decided to depict them as the villains for a change. As I was watching the credits roll at the end of the game, I was already thinking of playing the game again. The final stretch of the game was exciting, I was never bored with the combat, the story, or the characters, and there were a few things that I missed that I'm curious about. And those are all very good signs, I would say. Keep driving, motherfucker. Just keep driving. Would have been cool though, right? I will never forget a quote that I read on the back of the booklet of the CD of Dimension Hatros by Voivod. It was taken from the pop rock music newspaper called Sounds. And it said, they have all of metal's strengths and none of its cliches. And damn, that was a pretty good way to describe Voivod in the late 80s. And I would have to say the same thing about Keep Driving. It has all of RPG's strengths and none of its cliches. This has to be one of the most original RPGs that I have ever played. It has all the mechanics and features that we like from the genre, but they are implemented in ways that you've never seen before. And if it hadn't been for one particular thing that it didn't do all that well, this game would also be in my top 10 games of the year. Unfortunately, that one thing happens to be very important, and we are going to talk about it at some point, of course. But let's start with the good stuff. Keep Driving is a roguelite or roguelike, depending on how you play it, RPG in which you play a guy who embarks upon the adventure of attending the concert of his favorite rock band. And of course, he chose the venue that just so happens to be at the opposite end of the country. Hey, no judgment on my part, I've even traveled to other countries to see my favorite bands play. Also, maybe some things will happen along the way that will make you change your mind about your final destination and objective, but more on that later. It's a long trip, so you have to keep your car in decent conditions all the way through. You have to make sure you don't get mugged, become sick, or starve to death in the process, and of course you have to make it to the concert on time. And you have just the right amount of money to cover for your expenses, if nothing happens, which of course isn't going to be the case. The thing that stands out to me the most about Keep Driving is the way in which the game implements all the core mechanics of the CRPG genre. It's amazing. There is the equivalent of a character creation process. You can be a student, an unemployed dude, or a mechanic. These archetypes aren't merely cosmetic, they all come with perks that give you an edge over certain situations. Then you can choose an initial kit to bring with you that consists of different consumables. At the beginning of the game, there is only one car that you can drive, but over the course of multiple runs, you will unlock other vehicles, like a truck and a sports car. These vehicles have different advantages and disadvantages. Your initial car, for example, has a small trunk, and it doesn't have too much durability. It's not the best car to drive on dirt roads, but it has a lot of available passenger seats, which means you can pick up more hitchhikers, which is this game's version of companions in regular RPGs, and we'll get into that later. The truck, on the other hand, has 2 extra passenger seats, which means you can only have 2 companions, but it has a very large trunk, and it's very durable, so you probably won't have to worry too much about repairs. Also, over the course of the game, you'll be able to pick up different quests, and some of them require you to move things around that occupy a lot of space, like musical instruments, pizzas, beer crates, etc. And those can be quite profitable. During the character creation process, you also choose your relationship with your parents, which is the game's difficulty, which I think is fucking brilliant. So if your car breaks, or if you become incapacitated in any way and are unable to continue your journey, you can always call your parents to save your bacon. And the better your relationship is, the better the chance of them coming to your rescue. Now, every time you totally fuck up, the chance of them saving you decreases by 20%. So if your relationship is really bad at the beginning of the game, the chances of them helping you out of a tight spot even once is very slim. Also, the better your relationship with your parents, the better the condition you're going to be in when they save you. If you have a really good relationship, they'll get you to a safe place, they'll pay for a full gas tank, and they'll give you some cash to spare. The key to success in this game is to play a little bit like Phineas Fogg from Around the World in 80 Days, which is to say to plan ahead. Look at the map, take into account the type of vehicle you're driving, the types of roads that you can choose from, and the facilities available in every city and town. Spend your money wisely. Lottery tickets, for example, are very situational assets. They are very useful to bail you out of a bad situation with the police, but if you are staying out of highways, you're likely not going to run into any police officers. Similarly, duct tape is usually a good thing to have in your glove compartment. But if you are driving a truck, and if you stay mostly on the highway, you probably want to keep it in your trunk, and save that much coveted space in your glove compartment for things that are good to mitigate stress, for example. The game's character progression system is also brilliant. Over the course of the journey, you can find or buy auto parts to tune and upgrade your car. Some of these upgrades make you immune to cold or heat, some increase your car's durability, some allow you to cook food that needs preparation, some make your car more efficient in certain types of terrain, etc. But you also gain experience, level up, and gain points. And there are different talent trees with different skills on which to spend your points. Some are social, some have to do with your long-term survival, some make you better at sorting out the perils of the road, etc. Cities, towns, and other stops have facilities, and you do well to look at your map and take a minute to think about what the best option is. There are gas stations, restaurants, convenience stores, auto parts, shops, repair shops, exploration opportunities, etc. So for example, let's say that you walk into a store and there is a rope for sale. Ropes are very extremely situational and they aren't cheap. They are completely useless for road events, which is this game's equivalent of combat encounters, but they can be very extremely valuable and useful for exploration. So if you see a rope for sale on a shop, it's probably a good idea to see if the next stop or maybe the one after that one has an exploration node. And if there is one, you grab that thing, because you are likely going to amortize the investment tenfold. Speaking of exploration, the most important aspect of the gameplay mix is road events. These are the equivalent of combat encounters in other RPGs, but you also have exploration areas, which are labyrinthian outdoor or suburb locations with points of interest and obstacles. You'd do well to dust off that little notebook in which you used to draw a map of the labyrinth in those wizardry games or in most Sierra games from the mid-80s. Items like butterfly knives, ropes, and flashlights can come in very handy in these locations. So if you want to make the most out of your little Indiana Jones escapades in these places, you better bring all those things along. There are other mini-games like garages of impounded vehicles that you can sneak into and loot. Roads and places of interest are procedurally generated in every run. You have a broad cast of fixed possible hitchhikers, but you don't always run into the same people in the same places. These hitchhikers are your companions, and they have different abilities and different negative perks. They also have their own reasons to tag along for the ride, and in some cases they can steer you away from your initial objective and towards a new final objective, which I think is absolutely brilliant. So this old man, for example, wants you to go to the base of a mountain because he's a hiker. If you go out of your way to bring him to the base of the mountain like he asked, he will then try to convince you to go all the way up. As you can see, this is a dirt road and there aren't any stops. Will you be able to make it with your current supplies and with your car? Also, who knows, you might find a different purpose on the way there. I don't know how many endings there are, but I do know that they entail ditching your main objective altogether and changing it for an entirely new goal at some point, which I think is fantastic. You start your journey with just a couple of CDs, but over the course of your journey, you might run into people who are willing to share or sell their music to you. This music will be available for future runs, and you can change it on your CD player at any given time. One of the hitchhikers is a musician, so if you fulfill his quest, he'll find his inspiration and write and record a few songs that he'll share with you. These songs will also be available for you to play in future runs. Speaking of music, the role the soundtrack plays in the overall experience is brilliant, because your character is going to a concert who is listening to music as he drives. And as a player, you get to choose which music he listens to, and on top of that, you can find, purchase, and collect new music. And your music library grows with every run, which I think is fantastic. I may not be a fan of the music this guy listens to, but it's impressive how much of a musical universe they created exclusively for this game, and some songs I do find absolutely brilliant. Now, if you have played Dustland Delivery, you might be under the impression, telling by the game's visuals, that this game is a comparable title. It's not. These are very different games with very different gameplay cycles. Don't expect RPG quests with different outcomes that depend on your choices and on your party members' skills. Don't expect a plethora of survival mechanics or stronghold management features or an intense overarching grand plot. This is a much simpler game that costs 3 times as much. But the beauty here lies in how the game chooses to be an RPG, if that makes any sense. It's a fascinating premise that goes to show that not everything is invented in the realm of RPGs, and that you don't have to adhere to the genre's old tired formulas as a developer. This game would have easily been in the podium of RPGs of 2025 if it hadn't been for one thing, and it's the road events. Like we said, this is the game's equivalent of combat encounters. Now, I think it's easy for someone who plays D&D like RPGs for the combat and cares first and foremost about how his or her party sorts out combat encounters to misunderstand what road events are about and keep driving, and therefore to have the wrong expectations about them. To me, road events and keep driving are similar to the fights you have in Darkest Dungeon 2. Darkest Dungeon 2 is one of the most deceptive games out there. Winning combat encounters is not how you win the game in Darkest Dungeon 2. It might be where you lose it, but not where you win in the long run. The long run being the key word here. You win the game by building your party around a sound strategy, by making good use of your money, buying the right items early, mid, and late game, by choosing the right path on the map, by choosing wisely which bosses to kill and which ones to give a pass, etc. And it's the same thing in Keep Driving. Like I said, the key to winning this game is to approach it all out Phineas Fogg style, planning ahead and making a sensible use of your resources. However, the fights in Darkest Dungeon 2 are exciting at least, which is a lot more than can be said of road events in Keep Driving. They are quite literally a matching game. You need to match your skills to those of your companions and your consumables to the threat at hand in the most efficient way possible. That's it. Not the most exciting or challenging thing in the world. And unfortunately, that's what you spend most of your time doing. There is a fair bit of stress attached to the whole situation that makes this minigame matter, but it's a minigame at the end of the day. The main aspect of the gameplay is a minigame. Still, this has been one of the most pleasant surprises of the year, and I've still thrown more than 20 hours at this game, and I plan to throw a few more in 2026, because so far I have had fun the entire time I've been playing this game. $9 is a more than acceptable price for this title, but you can't get it for even less from time to time on Steam. Titans of the Past. Titans of the Past is a dungeon crawler RPG that's barking at the same tree, more or less, as games like Wizardry or Bard's Tales. There are many things to like about this game, and many things that aren't as great, but the thing that ultimately earned a spot for this title on this list is its combat. Allow me to elaborate. So the developers of Beyond Galaxyland, yes, let's say Beyond Galaxyland, in 2024 thought they would innovate by adding quick time parry mechanics to their turn-based combat. Yup, Beyond Galaxy in 2024 had quick time parries in their turn-based combat, just so you know. And I thought this was the worst idea that anyone could have ever come up with. In my opinion, it went against turn-based gameplay as a concept. So here's an idea. I don't like chess, but I, because fuck you, have decided that more people should be able to enjoy chess. But there's too much difference between those who are good and those who are bad. So I came up with a brilliant idea. A brilliant revision of the rules that'll level the playing field and make the game for everyone. This is the new rule. Now, every player gets the chance to slap the piece out of his or her opponent's hand. So if you're quicker slapping the piece out of your opponent's hand than he or she is putting it on the board, you get to thwart his or her move. Isn't this brilliant? Well, no, it's shit. I think you'd agree that it would completely destroy the game, because it would make agility more important than tactics and strategy, which is what the game is about. It is the reason why that game is turn-based, and why people take so fucking long to make their next move. But turn-based combat isn't perfect by design, and I understand why a lot of people don't like it. Wizardry 8, for example, has excellent combat, but the fight against the Rat King in Triton can be monumentally tedious if you aggro Rat King that are higher up in the tree. Same thing with some fights in the Raypax Rift. Now, how do we quote-unquote fix turn-based combat without defeating the purpose for which it was invented? Well, that's the challenge. And that is, I suspect, the question that the developers of Titans of the Past asked themselves when they were making the game, and that is why they abso-fucking-lutely nailed the combat in this game. Titans of the Past features a combination of turn-based and real-time combat that flows seamlessly from one to the other, making combat encounters exciting and dynamic as they are in games with real-time combat, without diminishing the importance that thoughtful decision-making has in turn-based games. So while you are standing still, the game is paused, but the instant you move or use your skills, time starts running again. Actions have cooldown times, and while you are standing still deciding what to do, this cooldown time will remain frozen until you start moving a game or execute an action that has a casting time. You can move out of the way of projectiles in this game and jump to avoid certain attacks and traps. You can also make time advance regularly if you press shift, which is very convenient to wait out the cooldown time of healing skills to use them outside of combat. The level layout is also designed for you to have fun with this system. There are puzzly trap rooms that require you to think about when to move, when to stop, and when to press shift to advance time while you are standing still. And that takes us to the next thing. The game is just crazy fun to play. Combat is fun and flowy, trap rooms are cool, exploration is rewarding, and there are a few puzzles for you to figure out. I think they could have done a lot more with this combat design though. Can you imagine all the spells and skills that you have in Wizardry 8 for example with this combat design? Fucking game of the year for sure. Don't get me wrong, the game has a decent array of skills, but it could have been much, much better. There are different types of challenges as well. There are dungeons for you to explore, but also arena-like encounters that are more about surviving hordes of enemies. But what does the gameplay cycle look like beyond the dungeon crawling part? Well, there is a stronghold with different buildings that you can unlock and upgrade. There you can create new party members, buy and sell equipment, equip items on your characters, and customize the spread of incoming damage on your formation, etc. Once you're done with these things, you can embark on an adventure, and there are a few for you to choose from. These adventures are presented as a map, not unlike the ones you get in games like Slay the Spire, except there aren't any random events. These maps have dungeons, arenas, stores, and camps where you can rest. You can also choose the difficulty of the adventure. Over the course of the game, you collect resources that you can use in your stronghold to upgrade your buildings and therefore make your party stronger. You start the game with a pre-made party of adventurers, which I don't like, but you can create new adventurers over the course of the game. And there is a fuck ton of races for you to choose from, all of which have advantages and disadvantages, and a fuck ton of classes. So no shortage of options there. The second most interesting thing about Titans of the Past though is the level design. Locations in Titans of the Past are handcrafted, and that's why they look cool and unique in my opinion. But because you must embark upon many adventures over the course of the game, you are inevitably going to end up revisiting the same locations again and again. But the interesting thing here is that locations in this game are super big, but they are comprised of areas that have randomized access. So if you visit the same location twice, chances are you'll get to explore it in a completely different way. Corridors that are blocked during one run may be open during the next. Outdoor areas that you didn't even get to look at from a distance during your first run may be the most important areas during the next, etc. And this is super mega cool. But Alex, it looks like this game is fun and innovates in ways that could potentially revolutionize dungeon crawlers if it were more popular. How come it sits so low on this list? Well, this is a game that I like very much, but there are a few things that drag it down to the bottom of this list. First, the UX outside of combat isn't great. In fact, the stronghold area looks and feels a little cheap. It's as though the artists who made the dungeons weren't available to design this part and they put in charge the least qualified guy of the lot. Second, it feels a little bit too amateurish, not being able to start a campaign from scratch, this menu where you see the pictures of the pets of the developers, the fact that the game has some issues with clickable areas when you play full screen. It's not a polished game, guys, not at all. Third, you cannot create your own party from the get-go, and I really didn't like this. Fourth, you have to play a little too long before you start unlocking the good stuff. I think progress should have been faster, especially considering all the races and classes that you can unlock. Fifth, there could have been a greater variety of spells and enemies sooner in the game. And I think these are fairly big issues. Some of them even feel like things that shouldn't have made it past the beta testing phase of the game. But outside these issues, I think the game's combat is absolutely brilliant. What they did with the level design is fantastic, and it's a perfect game to play when you have only 15 or 20 minutes to spare, or to waste away hours with it. So I got my eyes on this, guys. I think this game may still be better than it is in the future, and if they get the right people on board, their next game may actually be a banger. But that's it, those are the RPGs that did it for me in 2025, and that in some cases are still doing it for me in 2026. These are games that won't be getting their own video, so if you didn't see Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 or Swordhaven, maybe it's because I still have a little something up my sleeve coming up soon. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you are seeing on this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Come check us out on Discord if you don't mind all the boomer talk that goes on there. I personally love it and wouldn't change it for anything. And share the video if you thought it was cool. Bye everyone.
You're excused. You can go back to playing video games.